Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Hetty Lawman, the managing editor for the Journal on Education and Emergencies. Welcome to our webinar on publishing practitioners' notes from the field with JEiE. The purpose of today's webinar is to really highlight the field notes section of the journal, to talk about our standards, what it is those pieces look like, and to demystify the process of submitting to a peer-reviewed academic journal, which is something we recognize a lot of practitioners probably don't have familiarity with. So that's the purpose of today. I want to do some introductions before we get going. So again, I'm Hetty.
My name is Nathan Thompson. I serve as the Deputy Managing Editor for the journal.
And we also have Sweta Shah of the Aga Khan Foundation joining us. She is one of our wonderful, phenomenal board members. We're thrilled that she's here today to share her expertise. She's an expert on early childhood development, education in developing and conflict-affected contexts, and she recently published a book called Early Childhood Development in Humanitarian Crises. So we're thrilled to have her here today.
So hello everyone, good morning or good evening, depending on where you're signing in from. So as Hetty mentioned, I'm Sweta Shah and I lead the Aga Khan Foundation's early childhood development work, but I have many years of experience with education in emergencies as well in the humanitarian sector, and have been a long-standing INEE member and have been now on the editorial board for the past few years. So welcome.
Thank you, Sweta.
Thank you.
So a few notes of housekeeping before we get into the content of the webinar. As Peter mentioned, please keep your microphone muted to minimize background noise. You can post questions anytime in the chat area, and we'll cover those questions at the end of the webinar. This session is being recorded, and we're going to share those recordings, the presentation on INEE's website, inee.org. So just to go through what it is we're going to be speaking about today, I'll talk about who we are at the journal, our mission. Nate will talk about the aims, what it is we publish, and our reach. I'll come back in to discuss the double-blind peer review process, and then Sweta's going to take over for the discussion on the criteria for field notes and the common mistakes that authors often make when they're submitting manuscripts to the journal. And then Nate will close us out with the call for papers and contact information. So here's what our journal looks like. The Journal on Education in Emergencies is the first academic journal in the field that focuses specifically on education in emergencies. It was established at the end of 2014 by the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, our publisher, and the journal is hosted at New York University. Dana Birdie is the journal's editor-in-chief, and she's here at NYU. The journal was created in response to increasing calls for rigorous evidence on education in emergencies. And our primary mission is to bring research, practice, and policy together to strengthen the evidence base. And that is one of the main reasons that we not only publish research articles, but we include field notes in every publication.
Right, so I'd like to take it from here and speak a bit about what the journal aims to do and some of its mandates from INEE, our publisher. We aim to be a venue to stimulate research and debate, and one meaning of this is that we publish pieces that represent multiple points of view, pieces that reflect the work that people are doing in their organizations, in their institutions. Our authors come from a wide variety of disciplinary backgrounds, and so we publish a diversity of authors and pieces. Like Hetty mentioned, we're really hoping to bring together policy and practice, academia and the field, and so part of what the journal aims to do is to bridge those two sectors, and our field note section is a primary way in which we do that. We're looking to set rigorous standards for evidence in the field to produce a body of of knowledge in education emergencies that's reliable and dependable. But we'd also like to see other researchers and publications in the field following the standards that we're setting for how research is done in this context. And that means as much in terms of methods and the rigorous design of studies and careful acknowledgement of human subjects research as it means developing a way to describe work that's being done in the field in a way that lessons may be learned throughout the field. We seek to define knowledge gaps and key trends. Knowledge gaps change, of course, as politics change, as world events change. So the journal not only aims to keep up with the evidence and research that comes out of new situations, but also to be on the cutting edge. And therefore, we're also always trying to not just follow events with research, but to identify those key trends. And lastly, we want to be a venue for underrepresented voices. So authors that come from conflict or disaster affected contexts, authors who come from lower resourced institutions, global South authors. We're always looking to elevate their point of view and their voices, and in some rare cases, we might be able to provide a little bit of support to those authors, knowing that they often come from institutions where publishing in an academic journal is not necessarily a standard for their work. And likewise, EIE professionals who are working in international NGOs or local NGOs whose work not often is supported by an institution for publishing in a journal. We'd love to hear from them as well. Those non-academic roles. Right, so each issue of the journal typically contains these 3 sections. We publish research articles, field notes, and book reviews. And of course, the main focus of this webinar is to focus on that middle section, field notes. Although we're happy to address questions about research articles or book reviews later in the Q&A portion. Research articles are the traditional theoretical and empirical studies that address key questions in EIE. Sometimes we see pieces come through that offer new theory building or new frameworks in EIE, and so those are also acceptable. Our field notes section, which is really what we'd like to talk about here, are those practice-oriented articles that document a new or innovative program or policy or approach, a new tool or resource that's being implemented in the field. And our board member Sweta Shah will go into further detail with those. And then we also invite books for review, recently published books on EIE topics. So the journal has a fairly broad reach, and we're hoping with this webinar and with seeking to publish more and more practitioners' notes from the field that increased attention will come to the journal, and the evidence contained within our pages will reach even more people. There are a couple of mechanisms that we have used to make sure that we're reaching the broadest population that we can and getting the research and evidence into the hands of folks on the ground who need it the most, into academic organizations, academic institutions for further research and policymakers. And one of those mechanisms is that we are open source and freely available online via the INEE website. What this means to me is that the journal is available to download, share, send to your colleagues for free without logging in, really, even to the INEE website. The membership in INEE is not required. It's a great benefit. I encourage everyone listening to be a member of INEE so that our journal gets sent straight to your inbox. But it's a massive network of I think over 15,000 scholars and practitioners JEiE professionals working in all over the world and in all sectors, that the journal is essentially, that's the primary audience. And so through the very helpful INEE team, they help get our journal out to a very broad network. We also have our podcast. It's a fairly new initiative. The podcast is called Behind the Pages, and each author that is published in the pages of the journal is invited to come on and speak on the podcast, do an interview with us, and it's sort of a new form of sharing their learning from their research or their fieldwork. It's a different way to express the same ideas that are in the journal, but can often be more accessible and more human and often more emotional than what's in the pages of the journal. So we're finding that those are very positively received, and both listeners are very excited about those, as well as authors. It's sort of a motivating factor to publish with the journal, because they might get to appear on the podcast. We're currently searchable through Google Scholar, and the citations through Google Scholar we're seeing them tick up each quarter, so we're very excited about that. And we're making progress on the journal appearing in some additional academic databases, so that will come soon. And I'm going to hand it back over to Hetty to talk about the peer review process.
Great. So double-blind peer review. So this is the process that every manuscript that's submitted to the journal goes through. This is how we maintain the highest standards of academic scholarship, which we feel is very important in order to strengthen the evidence in the field and to be a leader in generating that knowledge and evidence. So peer review is the only widely accepted procedure for evaluating research, and we do put field notes through that same process. And the reason that we do that is to ensure that the knowledge being generated by those field notes will push the field forward, that it will that these are innovative new ideas that will benefit and strengthen the field. So who are our peer reviewers? Peer reviewers are practitioners, they're academics. So every manuscript that comes into the journal is assigned a lead editor who then selects reviewers based on their expertise matching that manuscript. So for example, a piece that comes in focused on early childhood development would very likely be assigned to Dr. Sweta Shah, and she would reach out to reviewers in her network with that expertise to see that piece through the process of review. So both the editor and the reviewers provide comments to every author through that process. And the next slide gives you a visual of what that process looks like. Now, I recognize that it feels like a slightly complicated visual here. I don't know if you can actually see my cursor. Oops, I went beyond. If you can.
You can annotate it if you look.
Annotate, oh, let's try that. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can do some, here we go. So it's gonna be an imperfect annotation process here, but step one, right at the top there, is when the author, sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. You know, I might skip the annotation because this isn't something that I've tried before. So where you see my green line, that is step one of the process. So I just want to walk through this flow chart to give an idea of what every manuscript goes through when it is submitted for peer review. So green line, the author submits the paper to the journal. Straight down from that arrow, the piece goes through a technical review. So that means that we just take a look at whether or not the initial standards of the journal have been met. And you can find those standards on our website, what it is every piece that is submitted to the journal needs to include. If those standards aren't met, our technical reviewers provide feedback on what it is that's missing and encourage authors to resubmit, including that information. Once an article is accepted through the, or passes a technical review, I should say, it is then assigned to an editor. Again, it'd be great if you can see my cursor, but in case you can't, that is the third block down in the center of the visual. The editor then does an evaluation of the paper, determines whether or not it can go out for peer review. So at that point, the editor could say, you know, actually this doesn't adhere to our standards. It needs to go back to the author. If it goes out for peer review, that editor selects reviewers, again, based on the expertise that relates to the article. Those experts then review the article. They provide feedback, comments to strengthen the piece. And an important piece of this is that those reviewers don't know the identity of the author. So that's the double blind part of the peer review process. So that the feedback that they're providing shouldn't be biased based on their knowledge of that author's work, or whether or not that's a colleague of theirs or some affiliation with the organization. We want that feedback to come anonymously and be provided to the author without any bias based on those things that I just mentioned. So when the editor receives that feedback, that editor then consolidates it with their own and sends all of that feedback back to the author. When the author receives the feedback, the author doesn't know the identity of the reviewers either, although they will know the identity of the editor who put that feedback letter together. The author then does some revisions and then sends that piece back. Once they've revised, they resubmit, the editor takes a look at it, and at that point, the editor may make the determination that, great, this piece is ready to accept, or it may have to go back out for a peer review. And then generally, I would say most pieces go through about 2 rounds of peer review and come back with 2 revisions. It's a very rare case where a piece that's submitted gets it accepted right off the bat. With all academic journals, and I would say I don't think we've ever had that case. They usually need to go through at least 1 round of revision. And then once it's gone through the review process, the submission process, the editor will make the final determination whether that piece is ready to accept. In some cases, it may just not fit, even after revisions, at which point the piece may be rejected. Once a piece is accepted, it then goes into copy editing and then is ready for publication. So all of this is to just kind of demystify what this process looks like, and to also demonstrate that it's a time-consuming process. It is both a volunteer commitment of our editors. All of our editorial board members who see these pieces through the peer review process volunteer their time, and the reviewers volunteer their time. So I think that's an important piece of knowledge to take in, because when you receive feedback, it's important to know that that those reviewers, those editors, they want to see your piece improve. They've dedicated their time and expertise into helping you make your writing and your knowledge building better. So just a little bit more about why this process is so important and why we do it. So it enables authors to receive feedback from experts with knowledge about the subject matter that will allow them to strengthen and improve their writing and their arguments. So I want to say that every manuscript that undergoes this process, our authors at the end of it always say, we're so grateful for the feedback that we've gotten. My piece is so much stronger. I want to highlight that, especially for those who haven't gone through a peer review process before. At times, authors can receive their manuscripts back with all of these comments and feedback and feel a sense of discouragement and feel like, oh, they hated my piece. You know, I can't make these, it's too much. You know, they just don't like it. What's the point? I want to say the more feedback that you get, the more our editors and reviewers are excited about your work. They want to see it move forward. So this is an opportunity to not only strengthen your own writing, but strengthen the field by contributing it back. And so I really want to encourage that revision process. Take it with, you know, the enthusiasm that these experts have spent their time on my work in order to move me forward in the field. And you know, this kind of speaks to that third bullet point, that the reason we do this is to ensure that this published material is of high quality, that it will benefit and advance the field, that these are innovative ideas that will encourage debate, that they are going to inform future practice, policy, and research. And I'm going to now send it over to Sweta to really dig into what it is we look for in these field notes.
Great. So thanks, Hetty and Nate, for getting us started. So field notes, that's why we're here. You know, first, many of you, I mean, I've talked to many practitioners. I'm a practitioner myself who's been in kind of the thick of EIE implementation and maybe doing interesting work, but then think, I don't have the time to write something and do a field note. Or, you know, someone might feel like, well, you know, English isn't my first language. I don't feel totally comfortable writing something that could be published in English. And all those are very fair points. And I would say that the reason why you should submit a field note, there are a few reasons. One, as EIE practitioners, you know that we still have relatively very little funding humanitarian funding that goes to EIE. We're at on average 2% of all humanitarian funding, and thankfully there's momentum and that's growing. But we need to have something like a journal to establish our field as a legitimate field that's important for humanitarian situations and that is impacting the lives of people and something that people are demanding. So that's one reason why you should think about submitting. But the other is that you might be doing really excellent or interesting stuff in the field, and it's important to be able to you know, share your experience with others, because others might be able to learn from that. They might be able to learn not only from the things that worked well, but also the things that didn't work well. So don't shy away from you know, being really honest in your field notes about what didn't work as well, because that's equally, if not more, important. And the third reason is that it's, you know, you yourself as a practitioner perhaps have colleagues who support with fundraising for your own organizations, or you yourself might be writing grants and proposals. So this is a way really to also raise the profile of your organization and yourself as a person. So as Nate mentioned, the membership for INEE is over 15,000 people. So once your paper is published in this journal, it goes to minimum like 15,000 people. Whether they read it or not, of course, is a different issue, but your name and your organization will be there. So I would say that those are three critical reasons why we really want to encourage people to write field notes. For those who feel like, well, you know, English isn't my first language, or I'm not great at writing, or whatever your fears may be, as Hetty mentioned, there are, you know, people like myself, Hetty, Nate, we have a whole bunch of editors who work voluntarily, who are willing to help you with your pieces. And that's everything, you know, and you can even submit a little abstract to us, which we're actually in the process of receiving abstracts, and we can give you feedback on that abstract and give you some ideas on how to frame it. So, you know, we can provide that kind of support early on, but then also when we get the pieces and it goes through a peer review process, we would also be giving feedback on not only content, but structure as well. So don't fear, you know, if you're scared of taking the plunge, we really encourage you to, because what's happening in the field is exciting and we want to hear from you. And not only we, but the field needs to hear from you, the community needs to hear from you. So let's look at the specific criteria. So the flow process that Hetty mentioned is the same process for field notes. So research and field notes go through the same process, double-blind peer review process. What's different about field notes is that you don't need to have rigorous research or evaluation data in a field note. That's the main difference, because you're talking about a model or a program. So let me go through some of our key points. We want to demonstrate the usefulness of a newer innovative tool, resource, program, policy approach. So we want something that's going to contribute, something different. If you're doing something, that is already well established, that people are doing already, then that might not be something that would be different for the field to learn from. um, you know, if you're looking at, for instance, like setting up temporary learning spaces, a lot of EIE programs will do that. But if there's something innovative or different that you're doing with the establishment of your temporary learning spaces, that might be interesting. But if you're just doing something that everyone does, then that might not be as you know contributing as much to the field. So that would be one criteria. So we want something that's new, that's or different. We want some sort of commentary or observations related, obviously, to some sort of research or current work in the field. Often what we get in field notes are someone did maybe a process evaluation, or maybe they just did some focus group discussions and some interviews, but they didn't do a rigorous evaluation, and that can also qualify as a field note. Or maybe you just have a model that's really interesting and you have some initial observations from the field. That's fine. So this does not need to have rigorous research methods. If it has some research but it's just not rigorous, then that would qualify as a field note. And if it has no research and it's more kind of observations and your experience and anecdotal evidence, then that would also be a field note. So the third point is that we critically evaluate progress and challenges to development or implementation. So if you're presenting a particular model that you worked at, we want to see kind of what is the model, what are the key elements of the model, how has it impacted the field, and what are the challenges. So again, as I mentioned, we also want to hear things that didn't go well, things that people can really learn from. That's really important. And you shouldn't shy away from that, because no program is perfect ever. There are always challenges. And that's where some of the best learning comes. The other thing is that these are not advocacy pieces. So when you're writing this, make sure that the language that you use is neutral. So of course you may work for the organization and you may have been implementing the model, and you may think it's such a fantastic model and you're super excited about its innovation. But in your language, we need you to keep it a bit more neutral. And if we find that it's going towards more, the language is more advocacy, then we can support you and give you suggestions on how to make some tweaks in the language. But this is not an advocacy piece. And as Hedy mentioned, because it's a double-blind process and editors and reviewers do not know who the authors are, and the authors won't know who the reviewers are. If you have in your field note, this is from X organization, then usually that will be blanked out. So will your name and your affiliation. So it is really blind. The only ones who may know would be kind of the lead editor and Hedy and Nathan, who would get kind of the initial submission. So remember, we don't want advocacy pieces. We're just talking about particular models and innovations, but not saying that one should be used or one is really amazing, but just like kind of more of a presentation of it. And you want to specify relevance to and implications for education in emergencies. So this piece is really important. So emergencies, the definition of emergencies can be anything from obviously, long-standing conflict to preparedness to acute response. But it's important that because this is a journal looking at humanitarian, we really need it to, if it's refugees in Europe, that's fine, but we want it to really be looking at humanitarian. So we will be looking at some of these critical areas, even as a first step, before it goes on to the peer review process. So we definitely want to make sure that it's something that's new and different and can contribute to the field. We want to make sure that it has commentary and observations and a model, an approach, and some details around that, and some positive aspects but challenges. We don't want to see advocacy language in the pieces, and we want to make sure that it fits with, you know, the journal, which is looking at education emergencies. Obviously, as Hetty and Nate have also mentioned, when we look at education, there's so much that's linked to education. So if you're coming from like a psychosocial lens or child protection lens, or even a cash lens, like if you're looking at cash being used for education programs and refugees, that's also interesting. If you're looking at psychosocial support used in education programs, that's also interesting. So it doesn't have to just be only education, but we really think that having the diverse perspectives actually makes it more interesting. So can we go to the next slide? Oh, am I able to? Let me see. Okay, great. So, okay, so avoid common mistakes. State how the article contributes to and advances the knowledge. I mentioned that multiple times. So if you're doing something that is pretty clear and known in the field, it won't pass that test. Again, we want an analysis, but not advocacy. The abstract should be 200 words, so it's just about a paragraph. And the maximum limit for field notes is 4,000 words. So if it's less than 4,000, that's okay, but we don't want it to be more than that. If it is more than that, we can also suggest ways to cut it, but we would ask that on your first submission that you try to keep it as close to 4,000 as possible. And so for research, we ask for 9,000 words as the max. And the reason for that is because we would want a more detailed description of the research methods in a research piece, whereas in a field note, we wouldn't expect that. Yeah, and as I mentioned, articles will be blinded, do not over self-cite. We want the original manuscript in English. You know, we're not in a position at this moment to take in manuscripts in other languages and translate them. However, what we are looking at after publication is we are looking at how we can make sure that articles that are in English, if it's focused on the Middle East, or if it's focused on Latin America, or if it's focused on West Africa, how we could get key pieces translated, but we do want to receive them in English. And we hope to have clear, coherent language. But again, if you get a structure right, then that will help you with your language as well. And then the citation style is the Chicago style, which you can find on our website below. Let's see if we can go to the next. Oops, can I go to the next? Yeah. Okay. So right now we have a call for papers for a special issue. It's focused on early childhood development and emergencies. And the projected publication is going to be spring 2020. And right now we have a deadline for 15th October. In this particular call for paper, it's a little bit different from previous calls for papers for education emergencies, because early childhood development is much more than education. And we're interested in early childhood education in emergency projects, but we're also very interested in looking at, you know, nutrition or health or protection. So if that's of interest, please check out this call for papers. If you want to submit to this or any, or even our general issues, and you're not sure if your idea fits, you're always welcome to send us like a little abstract, and we can give you feedback on whether it's a fit, and then you can decide whether you then write a full paper on it or not. Next.
Yeah, thank you, Sweta.
Yeah, great. So Nate.
Yeah, I'll take back the football here, and just add on the call for papers that we accept those pieces on more general education and emergencies topics on a rolling basis. So like Sweta said, please submit abstracts for comment, or if you have a prepared piece, please submit. You know, the instructions are on our website at your convenience, especially for general EIE topics that might not fit this particular thematic issue. Really excited about the thematic issue, of course, and Sweta, as well as Dr. Joan Lombardi from Harvard University are taking the lead on editing that, and we're very excited about that. I think that'll be an issue that results in a lot of great practitioner practice-oriented work and several field notes in that one. So look for that practice-based evidence in that issue, and hopefully also contribute. But also there's ways to contribute in the interim too.
So Nate, can I add one thing that I forgot?
Yeah.
You know, this is a journal like all other academic journals where, you know, if you've published something in another journal, we don't want you to just cut and paste and submit to us. I think that's really important. It just came to my mind. I just want to clarify that. You know, if you have like something really interesting in something you've already published and you rework it, that's okay. But I think the issue of like plagiarism, like we take that very seriously, and we don't want you to just take something that, like, if your organization just published a report, we don't want you to just cut and paste from that. If you want to summarize it and restructure it and get the kind of the similar points, that's okay, because that's a different article. But I think that's just a really important point to make sure everyone's clear on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Sweta. That's really important. We should have had a bullet point on that. So all manuscripts that come into the journal, they need to be 75% original material. So just like Sweta said, if you published it in a final report, you can't publish the same material here. You could rework it. You could take a focus on a different part of that research, that evaluation, that process that you didn't focus on in the final report. We know that there's a lot that goes on, and it doesn't always wind up in the final report. So you may want to take a completely different look at that work and then publish something with the journal. But yeah, it's really essential that these pieces aren't recycling information that you've already published elsewhere.
That's right. Great. So I think in just a moment, we'll open it up for question and answers. We'd like to spend a lot of time there, but just a quick contact slide. Everything that we have, all our policies and procedures, instructions for how to submit and what we're looking for are all available on our website, which you have the link there. But also, we're happy to field your questions. Hetty and I respond to this email address that's on the screen, journal@inee.org. That reaches the editorial office, so we'll be happy to take your questions or concerns there. And then the podcast that I mentioned earlier, we have a new set of episodes that launched a couple of months ago that we're still really excited about and promoting for interviews with authors from our most recently published issue. And so those can be found at that short link that takes you to SoundCloud. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts now as well. So please listen to the podcast. And with that, I think we can open it up for Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, I think we can unmute. You.
So one question that I see in the chat box, Hetty and Nate, is if manuscripts are rejected, will a reason be provided for why they're rejected?
Yes, absolutely. So like I said, throughout this process, we provide substantive feedback. The editors do, our editorial staff, the peer reviewers, and it's always to help you improve your writing. And we often encourage that you resubmit, but you'll never just get a reject without knowing why. We consider this process as something to improve our field at large. Whether or not you wind up publishing, we want to encourage you to continue to strengthen and build upon your work.
And then another comment is if they could receive the slides after the webinar, which I believe they can, right?
Yes, so the video here and the presentation will both be posted to the INEE website in the next couple of days. We have a question that says, please say something about the journal requirements for field notes. What's the next step after initial submission?
So I want to make sure I'm clear on the question. So we talked a little bit about what we look for in field notes, that this is something innovative and new, focused on a new program, a new intervention, a new policy, and or it can be commentary on a research process, something that you wouldn't ordinarily publish in a research article, right? So I want to also kind of clarify that sometimes we'll get field note submissions that are basically just a research article, but the research is like not very rigorous. So these field notes should be distinct. We encourage you to, highlight your focus group discussions or a process evaluation that you may have done, but then highlight what it is about this program, what it is that's different, so that it's not set up in the same way that a research article is. So the requirements for field notes, the kind of nitty gritty of like the 4,000 words, the word limit, the citation format that we use, all of that information can be found on the website. And then so step one after the initial submission. So that the first step would be to go into technical review, where we would take a look to make sure that the piece is contributing to education in emergencies, that it has adhered to those basic standards, the word limit, that it's focused on policy, practice, intervention, that is something innovative for the field. And if I didn't sufficiently answer that question, please add another one at the end.
So I did respond to that person on the chat saying that the process for field notes is the same as research pieces. It's just that the specific requirements are different. So hopefully that addressed that person's comment. There's another one that says that the person's writing a paper that cites a lot from the personal diary, and this person is not sure how to cite it. Do you have advice? It's like personal experiences.
So take a look at the Chicago citation format that we use. I think they have a specific way to cite something like personal observations, personal notes. And I think it's something like, I don't know exactly, but it's something like personal notes and then you put the date. But there is a specific way to do that follows the citation tools. And that's also something that we can help provide feedback on with our copy editor support. So if you don't get it right, it's not going to be the reason your piece doesn't move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I should also mention that, Hedy, when she mentioned the flow of how the double-blind peer review process happens, it is a bit of a long process. Just to be honest, like it's not going to happen in a month. Because we send it out to reviewers who are also volunteers, and we give them a certain amount of time to review articles, and they don't always stick to those. So if you submit something and it's taking a while, don't assume that your article was rejected. Sometimes it can take a while. That's why, in fact, we're doing the call for papers for our early childhood development and emergencies special issue now, because we need that time before we can submit or before we can actually have it published by the spring. So it can take 2 or 3 times to really get the article right, and then even once after it's approved, it'll go through copy editing. So even after you get like an acceptance, that doesn't mean that you're totally done. There's still going to be copy editing and other things. So it's a bit of a longer process. So it's not like quick like emergencies are, but it's a way for us to make sure we have the highest quality and that we help you, really produce the highest quality.
And again, just to say, if you're worried, oh, I haven't heard back from them in a while, you can always reach out to us. You can reach out to us with questions, with, here's the idea for a paper that I had. Could you give me feedback? We really do respond to that email regularly, and it's a resource for you and for us.
So we've gotten another question in the chat. Thank you, Jasmine. For research articles, the journal mentions that we require an explicit, well-recognized theoretical or conceptual framework. as one of our technical requirements. Can we give an example of how we would integrate such a framework? So this is more on the research side of things, I think. So would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question. This is a tricky question. So just in terms of what we expect that to look like, you would have an introduction to what your piece is about, and then you would lay out your framework. This is the framework that I'm using. This is the literature that I'm specifically drawing on, either theory about, it could be theory about early childhood development, theory about social emotional learning. This is the theory that I am drawing on that pertains to education and emergencies, to then look at this research that I've done, the data collection I've done, and the findings. So when you say examples of how you integrate it, so I think that is one of the biggest challenges in writing a good research article, is then integrating that feed framework into your findings section. So you've got your framework, you present the data that you collected, the data that you did, and then when you present your findings, you want to make sure that your findings speak back to that literature that you've presented at the top of your paper. So how is it that your research contributes something new to the field, to the literature, to the theory, to practice? How is it you are speaking back to education in emergencies, the way we think about it, the way we theorize it, the way that we do it, and contributing something new. So it's really essential that you not only present the framework, but that you do integrate it, as you've asked in your question. It's a great question. Thank you.
And sort of just to reiterate, our field notes section is very distinct from our research article section, so it doesn't necessarily require, and indeed it doesn't require, that theoretical or conceptual framework, but I think it's just as important to reference previous work in the field, especially practice-based work and guidance documents and foundational documents, as well as some authors of field notes do sort of integrate literature, academic literature, but it's not something that we would necessarily look for. But best practices and lessons learned, attaching those to some existing progress in the field or existing learning or guidance in the field is important.
Yeah. So if I could add one more thing to that question around providing an example. So let's say that you're looking at a research that looks at education and psychosocial support. Then what we would expect is to have some sort of frame, the psychosocial field has a number of different theoretical frameworks, and we would expect, you to choose one and to have a framing for your article around that. If possible. So if you're looking at early childhood development, we would expect some sort of child development sort of framework around that. So those are just examples that, in the literature, you'll find these theoretical frameworks. And if you're doing research, you would need to actually, have those anyway to frame your research. So that's kind of what we would expect. Whereas in a field note, we wouldn't expect any sort of theoretical framework at all. I mean, it'd be nice, but we don't need like an academic theoretical framework.
Great. So we're mindful of time, but are able to take a couple more questions. So those can be put in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and share your question that way.
I want to say that these are great questions, so keep them coming.
Yes.
And perhaps we can also add in that if you are right now, just listening to us and reflecting, and if you have questions later on, feel free to also reach out to that email, journal@INEE.org, right? That one. And we're happy to answer questions later on as well if they pop up in your mind.
Go through any of these past questions from previous webinars?
Yeah.
Sure.
So something that's come up in the past, and we've hinted on it in this webinar, is that we're sort of always interested in receiving works from authors whose language might not be, whose first language might not be English, or those in sort of under-resourced contexts where publishing like this is less common, and that's as much in the field notes section as in research. So frequently we get asked what kind of support can the journal offer to scholars, especially those in the Global South or those under-resourced institutions who feel less comfortable writing in English or might need some more support with the structure of a field note. And so I just want to be like super clear and concrete with the extent to which we can offer support. Now, I imagine the peer review process as a lot of that sort of guidance in helping to improve pieces, and the feedback that authors receive from the reviewers is substantive, and it goes straight to what ideas are being presented in the piece and what new knowledge is being shared in the piece and lessons learned. So our reviewers are careful not to necessarily critique the writing style, although they may be tempted to. We try to ask them to focus on the clarity of expression of the ideas. But you know, sometimes we have received a particularly promising piece, either research or field notes, that presents something like that would really improve the knowledge base, really help the field, and we can see great potential in it. And so at this moment, you know, we have to be super selective about what pieces receive some additional support beyond the peer review process. But in the past, on an exceptional circumstantial basis, we've coordinated with, on our team or the editorial team to offer some support, or an outside graduate researcher to connect with the author to sort of, fill in those gaps that between what is a great presentation of really powerful and compelling ideas and what would likely be successful in a peer review process. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, so this is, we have limited resources to provide this level of mentorship, but it is certainly a fundamental part of our mission. And so when the right piece comes along, we're willing to gather our resources together and do it. So just to say that if you've got somebody that you think is doing really powerful work, whose work may be represented, somebody in the Global South or a conflict affected context, and you want to encourage them to submit something. If you yourself have some work, you're concerned that you may just not have the right tools at your disposal, please submit, ask us questions, and again, we're going to do our best to support you through the process.
There are also resources, although limited, through INEE. INEE has several language community facilitators who liaise with, in particular, the members of INEE who operate in, I think, French, Arabic, Spanish, and Portuguese, right? And there are translations of all of our instructions and our submission processes on the website in all those languages. So the multilingual nature of INEE and how they publish the website is important. We're receiving submissions in English now, but as Sweta said, those language community facilitators and some resources that we're trying to put together in the background will hopefully be able to offer translations of evidence in the future. And we can talk a little bit about reviewers, as I think it's important to mention not only that we want to grow our authorship toward practitioners and toward folks in the field who are implementing EIE programs and policies, but also we're wanting to grow our reviewer base that way as well. So, even practitioners who might not have a PhD can review for the journal, and that's another great professional development opportunity, another feather in your cap as a person, but also as a member of your organization, to be known as someone who can read the field note, practice-based research from the field, and provide substantive comments to your peers.
So if that's something you're interested in doing, please please reach out and let us know if you'd like to be included in our reviewer database.
Mm-hmm.
Have we had any other questions come through?
No.
I think we can probably close out, but I want to. Sweta, do you have any key points that we left out or that we should add on before we finish the webinar for today?
No, I mean, it's just more to say that we strongly encourage all of you to really consider, submitting something. And as we mentioned, if you're not sure of whether you want to do it or whether you have the time, or you feel like maybe you're not ready to write something like this, you can also send us a short abstract. We can give you feedback on it, give you some ideas for structure, and then you can then decide whether you do or not. But it's really important for us that people in the field have a chance to contribute to the community and to how our field moves forward. So all of your ideas and the great work you're doing is really, really important to us. And also to say that we really also want diversity. When we say diversity, we mean diversity in terms of content and perspectives, but also diversity in terms of geographical areas. So we really, really want, more, we want a real diversity geographically as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fabulous.
Very
Thank
well
you
said.
so much.
Yes.
You really gave the perfect button to all of the essential points that we want to push through. Yeah, we really encourage you to submit, and we're enthusiastic about seeing new voices, new submissions from practitioners in the field. And again, reach out with any questions. This webinar will be available on the INEE site, and we look forward to your questions and your submissions soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.